We tend to think of modern warfare as a calculation, a system governed by checks, balances, and thick binders of official policy. We look at massive command centers and assume that the decisions made inside them are purely rational, calculated by thousands of experts following a master plan. Take Hideki Tojo in Japan. He operated as a career military bureaucrat, a high-level official strictly carrying out national policy through established institutional channels. But the leaders who actually dictated the course of the Second World War, Roosevelt, Churchill, Stalin, Hitler, and Mussolini, operated almost entirely outside of those systems. Before the United States fully entered the war, its military establishment drafted an official national policy called Germany First. The doctrine was to concentrate resources on defeating the Nazis before focusing on the Pacific. Yet the record of where the U.S. actually shipped its military equipment tells a different story. The data shows a near-perfect 50-50 split between the European and Pacific theaters. The official paperwork mandated one approach, but the institutions made no attempt to enforce it. Franklin Roosevelt preferred a balanced war for his own political reasons, so his personal inclinations simply overrode the written rules. The leaders making the decisions that mobilize millions and redraw maps rarely consult the manual. They consult their own instincts. When you strip away institutional guardrails, a nation's military begins to serve the personal psychological needs of the person at the top. In 1940, Benito Mussolini watched his ally Germany rack up victories and decided he needed a conquest of his own. Against the warnings of his own generals, he ordered an unprepared army into the Greek mountains. It was a choice driven entirely by his personal jealousy of Hitler. Joseph Stalin made an even graver error. In the lead-up to the Nazi invasion of 1941, he purged his own officers and actively refused to believe detailed intelligence warnings from his own spies. He had convinced himself that Hitler wouldn't attack. Millions of Soviet citizens were killed or captured because the survival of an entire state was held hostage to one man's internal blind spots. These strategies grew from a shared starting point, the First World War. Adolf Hitler spent years on the Western Front as a dispatch runner. That static trench warfare left him obsessed with overwhelming mechanical force. Decades later, that obsession manifested in orders for massive, thick armored tanks, prioritizing sheer power over strategic mobility. Winston Churchill spent time on that same front in 1916. Watching soldiers shredded by artillery changed how he viewed combat. He returned to London desperate to minimize British deaths, favoring political manipulation and peripheral campaigns over head-on attacks. Franklin Roosevelt's approach was heavily shaped by a humiliating political defeat when he ran for vice president in 1920. That loss made him intensely risk-averse. Rather than sacrificing American lives in daring maneuvers, Roosevelt built a war machine that relied on overwhelming production. He used factory quotas to create a surplus of machines, ensuring he didn't have to spend lives. The industrial output and troop movements of the 1940s bore the signature of these early traumas. Each man directed the war as he had personally learned to survive it. For the dictators, early victories created a lethal feedback loop. Hitler and Mussolini achieved so much initial success that they became convinced of their own genius, rendering them unable to adapt when the tide turned against them. Stalin survived only because his early failures were so catastrophic that he had no choice but to change. To save his country, he suppressed his ideology, opened his arms to American aid, and became hyper-practical. But once victory was assured, the paranoid ideologue returned. At the Yalta Conference, Stalin aggressively expanded Soviet territory, exploiting the failing health of Roosevelt to secure a footprint in Eastern Europe. The winners of the war were the leaders who were forced, either by democratic systems or sheer desperation, to temper their egos with reality. We still make the mistake of ignoring the individual. Today, Western analysts continually attempt to interpret foreign adversaries as rational state bureaucracies, following an economic logic. Vladimir Putin's priorities were defined by his years as a KGB agent during the Cold War. This background explains his drive for imperial expansion far more than any modern economic model. Prior to the invasion of Ukraine, Russian state functionaries were visibly uneasy about the economic consequences. The West was shocked when he attacked anyway, because we projected our own institutional logic onto a leader who answers only to his personal history. To predict a nation's grand strategy, reading their official policy documents is useless. You must look deeply into the strategist's personal history.